History has an ironclad law that has destroyed every single global reserve currency. Not most of them, every single one. The Portuguese real, the Spanish real, the Dutch guilder, the French franc, the British pound sterling. Each one reigned for roughly 80 to 110 years. Each empire's masters believed their dominance was eternal. Each civilization thought they were the exception to the laws of economic gravity. But they were all wrong. And right now, the United States dollar is sitting at year 80 of its cycle, poised precisely at the mathematical tipping point where every previous empire began its rapid terminal descent. This isn't some wild conspiracy theory, and it isn't the rambling of a doomsday prophet. This is history's algorithm. This is the physics of imperial rise and fall. If you look at the ledger, if you look at the macro data, and if you strip away the platitudes that politicians and central bankers use to keep you sedated, you will see that we are not approaching the pattern. We are deep inside the pattern. We are currently in stage 5 of the 6-stage cycle of destruction. This doesn't mean the end of the world, but it does mean the end of the world as you know it. It means the end of the Pax Americana and the beginning of a volatile era of repricing and wealth transfer. Not from the poor to the rich, but from the holders of paper, promises to the holders of real assets. Today, we are going to perform a forensic autopsy on the last day of the dollar, before it officially happens. We will uncover the mechanics that have led to this moment, why it is mathematically irreversible, and how you can position yourself on the right side of the inevitable reckoning. Welcome to the ruins of the future. To understand the future, we must first look at the past through the ghosts of the dead, because human history isn't a straight line up, it is a circle. A repetitive, vicious loop. The life cycle of every reserve currency empire follows an almost identical biological script. It isn't just similar, it is precise, almost fractal in nature. Stage 1. It usually begins after a major conflict. The winner sets the rules. They have the strongest military, and most importantly, they have the world's soundest money. This is usually hard asset-backed money, gold or silver. People trust it because it is real. That trust brings trade, and trade brings wealth. Stage 2. The boom. With wealth pouring in, the empire builds. Massive public works, massive infrastructure, and inevitably, the expansion of power. The society becomes rich, but it also becomes complacent. This is the top of the cycle. This is the moment every empire wishes time would freeze. But time never freezes, which leads to stage 3, overextension and debt. To maintain the standard of living, to maintain a massive military spread across the globe, to fund every expensive social program, the empire begins to spend more than it earns. How do they do it? They borrow at first, a little, then a lot. Stage 4, degeneracy. When the borrowing hits a limit, or when creditors get suspicious, the empire faces a choice. Austerity, which means pain, depression, and political suicide, or printing. Without fail, without morality, there isn't really a choice. Every empire, in every iteration, chooses to print. They dilute the currency to pay the debts. It seems like an easy way out, but this is the moment the cancer metastasizes. This brings us to stage 5, the stage we are living in right now, loss of confidence and capital flight. The rest of the world starts to realize the game is rigged. They realize the currency is no longer a store of value, but a weapon or a tool that will be debased at will. They start looking for the exits. They start quietly, then frantically, dumping the currency. And finally, stage 6, the collapse and reset. The currency loses its reserve status. The empire's purchasing power evaporates. Domestic hyperinflation or severe deflationary depression ensues. The empire retreats into being just another country, and a new order is born from the chaos. You don't believe this can happen to America. Let's look at the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, Spain was the titan of the world. Thanks to the discovery of the Americas, they had a monopoly on global silver. The Spanish real was the world's first true global reserve currency. You could spend it in Manila, Mexico City, or Madrid with equal ease. The Spanish kings felt like gods. They had infinite wealth, or so they thought. You see, Spain made a fatal error, one that we will see the US repeating in real time. They confused money with wealth. They didn't use that silver to build productive capacity, factories, or sustainable agriculture. They just spent it. They bought luxury goods, they fought endless religious wars, and they built a massive administrative state that relied on imports. As the silver poured in, it didn't make Spain rich, it just bid up prices. It was called the price revolution. For a century, inflation in Spain soared. Meanwhile, to fund those endless wars, the crown started debasing the coinage, putting less silver in, more copper. Sound familiar? It was the 16th century version of quantitative easing. The result, in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596, the Spanish crown defaulted. The most powerful empire on earth went bankrupt 4 times. With no productive base to support the currency, Once the flow of silver slowed, or rather, once the world was drowning in cheap silver, the value collapsed. Spain went from global hegemon to a second-rate European power, mired in debt and decay. The empire that had it all was hollowed out from the inside by its own monetary illusion. Let's fast forward a few centuries to the British Empire. Until the outbreak of World War I, the British pound sterling was the bedrock of finance. Sound as a pound wasn't just a saying, it was a fact. London was the world's banker. All trade cleared through London. If you wanted to buy anything internationally, you needed sterling. But war is expensive, terribly expensive. To fight Germany, Britain had to borrow. Who did they borrow from? Mostly the rising power, the United States. To keep the war machine running, Britain suspended the gold standard. They printed, they borrowed, they emptied the vaults. By 1945, Britain had won the war, but they had lost the economic war. They were drowning in debt. However, through inertia, the pound remained a reserve currency for a while after the war. It was a zombie status. The world hadn't adjusted yet. The illusion shattered during the Suez Crisis of 1956. It was a brutal reality check. When Britain tried to militarily intervene in Egypt, the United States didn't back its old ally. Instead, the US threatened to sell off its holdings of British pound bonds. That was the moment. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a financial humiliation. The threat caused a run on the pound. Britain was forced to withdraw, not because they were beaten on the battlefield, but because their currency was too fragile to withstand the attack. In that moment, the world saw the emperor had no clothes. The pound was no longer king. The dollar was crowned. From there, Britain faced decades of devaluation, inflation, and a decline in living standards relative to the US. From the center of the empire to a vassal state, the transition was painful and it was permanent. Now, look at the United States today. The US essentially inherited Britain's role at the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. The deal was simple. The dollar would be pegged to gold, $35 an ounce, and the rest of the world's currencies would be pegged to the dollar. It created trust. The dollar, Suti, Waswan, gold. Until it wasn't. In the 1960s, just like Spain and Britain before it, the US started spending more than it earned. The Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson's Great Society, guns and butter. The US printed more paper dollars than it had gold in the vaults to back them. Countries like France saw this and started asking for their physical gold in exchange for the paper. The gold started bleeding out of America. If it continued, the US would be insolvent. So, on the 15th of August, 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and closed the gold window. He called it temporary. Of course, like any government emergency measure, temporary became permanent. In that moment, the dollar shifted from an asset to a debt instrument. It became pure fiat. By historical laws, that should have been the beginning of the end. But the US pulled off an economic miracle, or a geopolitical masterstroke, that extended its hegemony. They created the petrodollar system. It was perhaps the greatest trade in history. The US told Saudi Arabia, and subsequently OPEC, "We will protect you. We will give you weapons. We will ensure your thrones are safe. In exchange, you do one thing. Price your oil side-only in US dollars." This created artificial, endless demand for dollars. Every country needed oil, so every country needed dollars. It meant the US could print money to buy the world's goods, and the world had to absorb the inflation. We exported our inflation. We traded paper for hard assets. It was the ultimate free lunch. It allowed the US to build the largest debt bubble in human history. But that brings us to today, and why the cycle is accelerating toward its conclusion. The system, built on trust and demand, is taking a fatal hit from two directions: geopolitical weaponization and mathematical unsustainability. First, the weaponization. When the US froze Russia's central bank reserves and kicked them out of SWIFT in 2022, regardless of your view on the conflict, it sent a shockwave through the global financial system. It told every non-Western nation a clear message: your money isn't your money. If your foreign policy disagrees with Washington, your life savings can be zeroed out overnight. This broke the core promise of a reserve currency neutrality. A reserve currency is supposed to be a utility, like water or air, not a political truncheon. When you weaponize it, you force your competitors to build alternatives. This is why we are seeing the fastest de-dollarization in decades. It's not just headlines, it's data. It's why central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace since 1967. They aren't buying an asset, they are buying insurance against the dollar system. They are taking their chips off the casino table. The BRICS alliance isn't an anti-American club, it is an anti-risk club. They are building parallel payment rails, not because they hate America, but because they can no longer afford the risk of relying on it. Second, the mathematical unsustainability. This isn't controversial, this isn't opinion, it is cold, hard arithmetic. The US federal debt is over $34 trillion. The curve isn't even linear anymore. It is exponential. It is the tyranny of compounding interest. The interest payments alone on us debt now exceed the defense budget. It has become a doom loop. To pay the interest on the old debt, the government must borrow more new debt. It is paying off a credit card with another credit card. This leads to a binary outcome, a choice that is really no choice at all. Option A, default. The US government admits it can't pay. The global financial system vaporizes instantly. Credit markets freeze. It is a Great Depression level deflationary collapse. Politically, this is impossible. No politician will ever volunteer to push that button. Option B, inflate. The Federal Reserve prints the money to buy the bonds, artificially suppressing rates and paying back the debt with devalued currency. It is a soft default. The creditors get their nominal money back, but the money buys nothing. Throughout history, from Rome to Weimar, from Spain to Britain, every regime faced with this choice chooses option B. Inflation is the path of least resistance. It is the hidden tax. It is the theft that happens in the dead of night, where most victims don't even know they've been robbed. So, the conclusion is written. The dollar's days as the final global reserve currency are numbered. It won't happen overnight, until it does. As Hemingway said about going bankrupt, gradually, then suddenly. We are at the end of the gradually phase. We are seeing the cracks. Oil deals settling in yuan. Central banks hoarding gold. Inflation sticking in the US domestic economy. So what does the last day of the dollar look like? It likely won't be a Hollywood explosion. There won't be a single moment where the screen goes black. Instead, it will be a reset of living standards. For the average American, it means imported goods become excruciatingly expensive. It means the end of a consumption-based lifestyle funded by borrowing from the world. It means chronic structural inflation where the purchasing power of savings is ruthlessly eroded. For the world, it means fragmentation. We will see a world split into currency blocks. Less efficient, more friction, but more decentralized. Here is the scary part, but also the hopeful part. Now that you know the script, now that you understand how this historical machine operates, you don't have to be a victim of it. Most people will panic. They will hold on to their depreciating paper until it is too late. They will blame politicians. They will blame the other side. They will blame greedy corporations, not understanding that this is a systemic inevitability of the cycle. But you don't have to. Smart money is already moving. That is why you don't see the wealthy holding massive piles of cash. They hold assets. Land, real estate, gold, Bitcoin, productive businesses, things that have intrinsic value, regardless of what currency denomination is slapped on them. This is the core lesson. During a currency collapse, wealth isn't destroyed, it is transferred. It transfers from the oblivious to the informed. From the creditor to the debtor, if the debt is fixed rate and used for hard assets. From those who trust paper promises to those who trust physical reality. The last day of the dollar isn't the end. It is day one of a new arrangement. The music is slowing down in this game of musical chairs. The 80-year-old machine is making its final grinding noises. Don't wait for the music to stop to look for a chair. Don't bet your future on a mathematical anomaly that is correcting itself. History has given us the roadmap. The task now is simply to learn to swim before the tide inevitably turns. If you want to dive deeper into exactly how to shield yourself during these specific phases and what assets have survived previous imperial collapses, make sure you are subscribed. Because on this channel, we don't just watch history burn, we learn how to be fireproof. Stay awake, stay vigilant. I'll see you in the next one.